the U.S., China, and world trade, the outlook for the forklift market, and automation hits the high seas. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. I am Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. As second half warehouse projects start ramping up, now's the time to make sure your facility is ready to perform. From durable rack and pallet labels to cold storage solutions, floor striping, and professional installation, ID Label helps warehouses stay organized, accurate, and operational. Visit idlabelinc.com to request your free sample pack today. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, 2 weeks ago, President Trump had an historic meeting with China's President Xi. It was a highly anticipated gathering as there was a lot to talk about, including the war against Iran and the ongoing oil constraints. But not a lot was actually decided at the meetings, at least not so far. To help us unwrap what took place and also discuss international trade and worldwide threats to our supply chains, I recently spoke with Matt Lekstutis. He's a director at supply chain and consulting firm Efficio. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Matt. It's good to have you with us today on Logistics Matters.
Well, hello, David. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. For those who are not familiar with Efficio, can you tell us a little bit about your company and its role in the supply chain industry?
Sure. Efficio, we're a global procurement and supply chain consultancy. We work with companies around the world, global powerhouses through mid-sized organizations around the world. And we work with them hands-on to navigate their way through things like performance improvement, as well as the kinds of changes in trade and political disruption that we've been seeing lately.
And you mentioned political disruption. We've seen a lot of that this year, with all the world events going on. We've got a couple of wars, blockage right now, the Strait of Hormuz, chaotic and changing tariff policies, and other restrictions on the normal flow of raw materials and finished goods that are produced throughout the world. Are we finding today that supply chains are actually becoming weaponized and political?
Weaponized that's a big word. Certainly political for sure. And if by weaponized you mean, used for instruments of political policy, foreign policy, beyond just trade interests and things like that, I would say absolutely. And, if we look at, what's going on in Iran, in the Strait of Hormuz, I think that illustrates that pretty well, right? That supply chain around energy and other crucial materials is being used as part of influencing how that plays out there.
Right. And earlier, of course, we had the blockage of the Red Sea, where ships were forced to go around the Horn of Africa in order to avoid that particular region. So this isn't something that just began with this war.
It's not new, but I think, we're seeing, certainly an escalation of pace, right? I think I started to get a little bit anxious as you went through the list of all the things that we've seen, in the last 12 months, right? So it wasn't long ago that we were just talking about new tariffs being rolled out, and now we've had all these other things happen as well. So I think it's, the pace at which these things are happening and the willingness of world governments to use them for those kinds of ends.
Yeah, it certainly has been a dizzying pace the last year. So 2 weeks ago in Beijing, President Trump and President Xi met and actually resulted in few deals. What's your take on what was accomplished compared to maybe the expectations of what people thought, and how might that affect supply chains?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to necessarily know what others expected to come out of that. I think if folks had grand expectations of an alliance to end the war in Iran, to open up global free trade again, and to address some of the constraints that we've had around critical materials, things like rare earths, integrated circuits, and things like that. Was probably never really going to be in the cards. What did we see? I think we saw some good outcomes, right? We saw stuff that was good for agriculture. We saw stuff that was good for Boeing and our aerospace and defense sector. I think that was positive. But I think more importantly, it's what we didn't see, right? What we didn't see was an escalation of tension, right? And further disruption and further uncertainty, which is really something that supply chains just can't afford right now.
And of course, last week, President Xi of China and Russian President Putin met together. Does that complicate things a bit for U.S. negotiations?
I don't think so. It doesn't complicate it. The fact of the matter is, those ties are there, and they're trading partners. They are strategic partners around their political agendas. So I don't think it complicates things. In fact, I think it's probably good that it brings it more to the forefront, that folks are seeing the conversations going on, and that there is an open channel of conversation, right, around these things. So I think that part of it is, absolutely positive. And these are going to be complex discussions and negotiations. And I would say the fact it really is that so much of this is structural interdependence of these supply chains and economies that deal making is not going to resolve that. It's going to take years to reduce some of the dependencies that we have strategically, as well as from a security perspective, around things like rare earths and energy and the most advanced, AI chips in Taiwan, etc. So simple deal making is not going to be the end game here, right? It's going to be managing volatility that allows the big nations and the big economies to move forward with confidence that they can count on a more stable environment while they pursue these other diversification and de-risking strategies.
You mentioned about trying to be as independent as possible for America, taking care of its own needs, but there's a lot of materials we don't have. We don't have the rare earths available to us that China and other countries do. Doesn't it require us to make good trades and make good deals on the international level?
Well, absolutely. What we want to do, right, as you rightly say, the fact of the matter is, 96% of the rare earths and the most sophisticated magnets and things like that go into our products. We don't have, and there's really no other source other than China. So, yes, right, we're going to have good relationships, right? But there's no real deal to be struck, right, with say Russia or Europe, right? That's going to miraculously create new capacity, right? So it's more about establishing a more predictable and open and visible sort of trade relationship across those nations as that sort of additional capacity and other options are brought online. But those things will take decades. Deals take days, right?
Sure. And of course, Taiwan is still a big issue between the United States and China. The meeting didn't really result in any kind of a statement other than a warning from President Xi about Taiwan and the US's reaction to it. Many are calling the possible invasion of Taiwan inevitable. What will happen to supply chains and the supply of semiconductors in particular if Taiwan is no longer a source for those and China does indeed invade that particular part of the world?
That's a huge and complicated question, right? So I think, again, what we can see is the source of supply is concentrated there, without a doubt. So the question is, would that invasion disrupt availability? If there were an invasion, what it kind of comes down to is similar to the Strait of Hormuz, right? If, is this a quick transition of power if something like that were to happen? Or are we talking about something that drags on into months or into years, right? So, a short, um, a short intervention, it's a shock that, systems could absorb and, and move on. If it tends to stretch out, then, it's not unlikely that you see some things play out that, really significantly disrupt availability and flow. And the trade hubs there in that region are not dissimilar from Ames in the sense that they could be used um, as tools to get to the outcomes that folks want. So, absolutely, significant, risk, there around any kind of disruption, whether it's geopolitical or naturally occurring.
And of course, the United States and China are in a race for artificial intelligence, for which semiconductor chips play a huge part in that. Is that possibly one reason why China has eyes on Taiwan and maybe looking to be able to sort of corner that semiconductor market and advance politically in that area? Again, kind of using it as a weapon.
Yeah, I don't know if that is necessarily completely what their agenda is. It's hard for me to get inside of their heads, right? But certainly they have recognized the strengths that they have, right? They have recognized that that is a strategic asset, and that's got to be at least part of what they're thinking about, right? In terms of advancing their own economy, right, and their own global capabilities. And I think that's the framework with which the two presidents met, right? Trump and Xi met, I think, in a situation of significant in, interdependency and entanglement, but frankly, it's asymmetric, right? I think there's a lot more concentration of critical resources and critical industries there in China than the Chinese dependence on U.S. markets.
Right. And in the last couple of years, a number of companies have been moving out of China for their supply, or maybe adopting a China plus one kind of strategy. With all of these threats and fears that we're seeing right now, what should supply chain managers do to eliminate some of that risk?
Well, first off, know where your exposures are, right? And map them against these particular things, right? So, a lot of conversations around resilience and optionality in China plus one. But I think it's more about global regional supply chains that most companies are thinking about moving to. And where it starts with is, understanding not just your tier one suppliers, but who their suppliers are, and tracing that through to where are really these intractable constraint points, right? Does it land you at the door of rare earth materials, right? Um, those are the places where you want to intervene around where you're getting your source of supply, so that if there is a disruption in some way or form, perhaps at least you have, some optionality around the suppliers that are drawing on those, who may be in different position with China at any given time. Because, as we've seen with the Strait of Hormuz, the access is uneven, right? And it's being granted in some cases to some and not to others. So finding those choke points and creating optionality there, as well as taking actions like building, safety stocks and negotiating allocation agreements and things like that. Should things become constrained, to ensure that you have supply. So, it is absolutely a set of actions that are very much more specific than just taking your operations out of China or adding China plus one.
Some good advice. We've been talking today with Matt Lekstutis. He's a director at supply chain and consulting firm Efficio. Thank you again, Matt, for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Victoria, you reported this week on the outlook for the forklift and pallet handling market. What are buyers saying as we hit the midpoint of this year?
Well, they are pretty upbeat in 2026, with many saying they expect to increase capital expenditures on forklifts and pallet handling technologies this year as compared to last year. This information comes from a recent Voice of Market report from London based research firm Interact Analysis. And the researchers there surveyed decision makers who are involved in the use, selection, and purchase of automation technologies for their facilities globally. So, a wide range of automation technologies, but this is very focused on forklifts and pallet handling equipment, as you mentioned. And the report covers both operator driven and automated forklifts and pallet handling equipment. So, we're talking about adding equipment that can either replace manual activities in a facility or furthering existing automation strategies by adding even more advanced solutions.
So, Victoria, how big of an increase are we talking about? And are there specific industries or market segments that are driving this trend?
Well, about half of those surveyed who said they expect to increase those capital expenditures said they anticipate growth of more than 15%. And e commerce companies were considerably more bullish than their counterparts in areas such as retail, manufacturing, third party logistics, and parcel. And I think that makes sense given the growth of e commerce that we've been covering over the past several years. The research also highlights companies' top workflow priorities when it comes to implementing those solutions. And receiving and unloading lead the way, with 54% of respondents saying they want to automate or further automate those processes. And respondents said the reasons for that are to improve accuracy and reduce damage to stock. So, some good news for makers of both traditional and more advanced forklifts and pallet handling equipment, and also good news for the continued modernization of warehouses around the world.
Yes, it is. And even with an uncertain economy, it's good that managers are seeing the importance of their supply chains and making appropriate investments to improve them.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
And Ben, it seems that anything that moves these days is being designed to be driverless in some way. And you wrote this week about a less common type of transport vehicle that is getting the autonomous treatment.
Yeah, we've been writing for years, as you say, about all kinds of autonomous vehicles. There were AGVs for decades now, AMRs, with the robots in the warehouses more recently. Self-driving forklifts also have been seen around. If you visit a college campus, you might see those outdoor delivery robots. Of course, self-driving cars. I had an Uber ride in one a couple weeks ago. With some self-driving trucks, more and more pilots of those, some flying drones. But the one that we saw this week was actually about autonomous commercial ships. This came from the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. And they launched an international framework to regulate the safety of autonomous ships, which operate with little or no human crew on board. So the IMO said that, well, the number, to be clear, of fully crewless or remote operated ships, two different classes there, are currently very small. A growing number are being successfully trialed internationally at sea, and that raises some really important questions.
Right. And I guess most of the time that a ship is at sea, it's fairly isolated in the middle of the ocean. So autonomous ships does make some sort of sense.
Exactly. That's the thinking behind this approach. But what the IMO has its concerns about is safety. So their new framework would ensure that either remotely controlled or fully autonomous ships are designed and operated to a level of safety and security and environmental protection that's the same as expected of a conventional ship. And also that they comply with what's called the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. That's a long name, but it's a set of safety regs for merchant ships that was actually drafted after the Titanic sinking disaster. So this new code from the IMO introduces requirements for the design and operation of these autonomous ships. What they're looking at specifically is stuff like navigation, their connectivity to whatever a remote control system might be, the actual remote operations themselves, fire safety, and search and rescue. Should an autonomous ship be in the area where a manned ship might have sunk or have lost man overboard. Will it be able to help? So to ensure that it can reach that level of performance, the IMO emphasized, risk assessment, robust system design, cybersecurity, which is another good point, and also the integration with remote operation centers. And one more important detail that was really interesting, the IMO framework underscored the importance of human oversight, with the master, what we would call a ship's captain, retaining overall responsibility for the ship at all times, even if they're not on board.
Well, that does make a lot of sense. Someone still has to remain responsible for seeing that the vessel safely makes it to its destination.
It really made a lot of sense to me. There are going to be some curious decisions coming up.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. Again, we'd like to thank Matt Lekstutis of Efficio for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. Planning a warehouse expansion, WMS rollout, or relabeling project later this year? Well, now's the time to lock in your labeling partner before schedules fill up. ID Label manufactures and installs durable warehouse labels, signs, pallet labels, and floor marking solutions built for real warehouse environments. Request your free sample pack today at idlabelinc.com. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.